Okay, cool. So I think the main thing I wanted to share with everybody today is the fatal crash report for the most recent incident on Walnut Street in the vicinity of 12th Street. And I guess before I get to, and just being honest, that this is always something that I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with this group, and I'm excited about that, but I'm also extremely anxious about what to say and how to say it. And it's always, I'll get more into it, but I'm happy that we're doing this. And so big picture, this is just following up on a resolution that we as a traffic commission approved last November. The text of that resolution's up here, and I guess the more I've gone through this, like the three things that are being asked of me are the questions are great. They're the right questions, I think, to ask. And so just appreciating that. So I'm going to try to go through those, but that's why we're here and why I'm doing this presentation. So just a little bit on the crash that happened. So it was on a Sunday morning, so late at night, Saturday night, early Sunday morning. In September, it was, of course, dark, but one of the things that we note through is that there is street lighting present. I think there's actually a light pole very close to where this exact incident occurred. The conditions were dry, it was clear weather, all that can be factors in some crashes. Just to note that, so essentially what happened was there was a scooter rider that was struck by a northbound vehicle. The scooter was in the bicycle lane south of 12th Street. The vehicle was traveling north and just essentially veered into the bicycle lane, struck the scooter rider. There's a lot of reports that were out in the media. Just want to clear that happened in the bike lane. The driver ended up entering the sidewalk north of 12th Street. I think essentially using the ramps, probably there's pretty significant curves, and very quickly after that and re-entered the road. There were pedestrians in the area. Just that it was south of 12th Street, the scooter was in the bike lane, and that the driver continued after the crash. It was a hit and run. There were reports that the driver appeared to be intoxicated. As far as I'm aware, I can't definitively say that they were, but there were just reports that there were signs they may have been. So then just this is a Google Street View. Of course, I've been out there tons of times, but didn't actually take a picture, or that's not in here, but just wanting to revisit some basic attributes of Walnut Street here. So it's a northbound one-way 2-vehicle lane road with a buffered bike lane. So buffer means there is a space between the travel vehicle lane and the bike lane, but without any physical devices that provides protection. Besides space, it's a fairly wide road. I've got the dimension, some of it, I think it's 37 feet. I can look up exactly what it is, but it's a wide road. The interesting thing is the lane that we're in right here, the easternmost lane, is actually narrow. It's less than 10 feet wide. So that's just an interesting tidbit. You can see there are sidewalks on both sides of the road. On the east side, there is no tree plot. It's just directly adjacent to the road. Wanting to note that in the vicinity of this area, the city recently did construct two new traffic signals, one at 11th Street just behind us in this picture, and then one down just past the railroad crossing at 14th. And with those, so there's new signalized intersections. They were previously not signalized. Projects included some bump outs where we could on the west side of the road into Walnut Street. And those were activated in July, so before this crash occurred. A couple other, just a bit about Walnut Street. It is a primary arterial per our transportation plan. It's also a main street typology per our transportation plan. And really, it's very, very important. I think we are all aware, because I think Beth in the past and by Ryan has also talked about this. We have a transportation plan talks about needing to do a corridor study here to identify the best ways to improve multimodal travel to and through downtown while still allowing for safe and efficient automobile travel. So that is a corridor study that will happen. There is a contract in place with a consultant team to do that. And really that work will occur pretty significantly next year in 2023. So it's in process, and expect to see more here soon. So that will be really, I think, exploring and vetting what the vision and more detailed plan for this corridor and college is going forward. So just a couple other things. So still November, we just recently collected some updated traffic counts in this vicinity. So just to paint the picture, it's about 11,000 vehicles a day are driving Walnut between 11th and 12th. You see the average speed there of just about close to 34 miles an hour, 85th percentile, 38, 95th of 42. There certainly are people that drive faster than that, but officially, this codified speed limit in this area is 25 miles per hour. One thing that we noted at the time of the crash, there were the closest speed limit sign was essentially south of downtown on Walnut Street, and at that area the speed limit is 20. So at the time of the crash, the driver may have assumed it was a 20-mile-an-hour road, but officially at 11th Street, it changes to a 25-mile-an-hour road, and there is now a speed limit sign on the left side of the road, and we have a work order in process to install another speed limit sign on the right side of the road to establish that as the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit it is codified as. So that's a change that an issue we noted. There was previously a speed limit sign there that was through our signal project temporarily relocated. It was in the way of putting in the signal. So there was no sign at the time of the crash. Though I will also admit, I don't think that sign would have made any difference in what we're talking about today. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that knowing it's a really wide road, and sometimes we'll hear comments or get requests to just paint narrower travel lanes, and that will lower speeds. So just that one of the lanes is very wide, and one of the lanes is 9.5 feet. And clearly people are driving very fast in this area, so paint doesn't significantly change vehicle behavior.
But are you able to differentiate whether that speed, whether the higher speed is in the right or the left lane, the wider or the narrower lane?
We could. This count did not do that, and just from personal observations, I don't think there's a significant change. And what you really will see is, I think many drivers in that narrower lane, their right wheel probably is on the buffered bike lane pavement marking. So they are using that buffered space.
So real quick, on the reduction of lane size, are you guys seeing a reduction in speed just coming from a wider path to a smaller path, or is it just a smaller path in general will reduce?
I think of space that physically feels smaller and confined, but I'll get easily sidetracked, but like on West Kirkwood several years ago, somebody from an advocate came in and said, if you just paint a shoulder and narrow the lanes, it will decrease speeds on Kirkwood. And I told the mayor that will not make a difference, but it's worth a try. And we did it. And we actually found after we did that, it's probably not statistically significant, but we actually noticed the speed went up. So it just was an example of
I just never heard that before, so that's I'm curious.
Paint itself does not change speeds, is my strong opinion, and Kirkwood is a good example of local evidence of that. So now I'm going to just jump into the three questions that were passed in the resolution. So the first being infrastructure design attributes that may have contributed to the crash. And so just listing some basic things here. It's a very wide road. It's straight. It's 2-lane, one-way, downhill. It's a very wide open space with limited physical features that make it feel constrained. So it has that psychological effect, and that there just are limited protections for vulnerable road users, whether it's buffer for sidewalks, protection for bicycles, or different things. So so that's it. There's no stop sign or signalized intersection in this area that would also kind of affect things. So what steps might reduce the likelihood of such an incident in the future? So this is like the big question in my mind. And if I'm being honest, like how of a narrow lens do I look at this topic versus how broad of a lens, because that can get very, I put something here and I'm going to talk on some others, but it's not a black and white answer, I guess. So the most obvious thing that I'm listing here is the conversion of the buffered bicycle lane to a protected bicycle lane. But just wanting to take a step and look at like what other things might be. So like I've been talking about things like just culture, our local national culture of safety and trying to promote and get buy-in to the safe system approach. And I'll get into a little bit more of that later. Other things that may reduce it are different vehicle technology, self-driving cars or cars with enhanced warning systems. There's even things out there about things that if you are intoxicated, your vehicle will not let you drive. There's things like that could reduce the likelihood. And another thing that could is increased enforcement. Realistic, if we had more resources to do more speed or DUI or more presence or more officers, those kind of things, or additional tools that we don't have legal access to, like automated speed enforcement or things like that, could reduce the likelihood of this. And then I listed one roadway change, but there may be many others that, how big or small, like additional curb extensions. We could have additional controlled intersections. We could have no bike lane and really, really wide side, like the corridor study will be really interesting to figure out what that vision is. So just there's a lot of potential steps that could reduce the likelihood.
Can you explain automated speed to me?
Sure, automated speed enforcement.
Yeah.
So essentially, cameras at locations that can measure speeds, take a snapshot of a license plate, maybe the driver in the vehicle, and send a ticket by mail.
I just didn't know if you could pick me up at once and then make the light red ahead of me.
Oh, yeah.
That's more difficult.
Probably.
But I just wondered how far that kind of technology, or whether it's just issuing tickets.
I think in my mind, as I said, it was primarily thinking about like the legal enforcement of drive exceeding speed limits. But that's where if we had additional controlled intersections or more signals at each location, then you can try to measure and enhance the progression of corridors. But also a lot of this, I want to wait till our corridor study.
Sure.
To understand.
I just wanted an explanation. Yeah. Thank you.
No, that's great question. And so then the other question is an estimate of the resources needed to take those steps. And so, depending on which direction we go, but I'm focusing on the buffered to protected bicycle lane. Big picture, it's a permanent conversion would be very significant. So when I say permanent, I'm thinking of something like the 7 line or something like Adams Street between 3rd and Kirkwood. And I think that something more permanent with curbs and potentially street trees and things like that, that would be the most effective, but also most costly. But I want to own that there are temporary options that are also possible. We could put delineator posts. We could put temporary rubber curbs or different things to create. By definition, that would be a protected bicycle lane. But I want to recognize that in this specific instance, the driver literally drove over a curb and still continued and didn't stop. So if they hit a delineator post that's meant to bend the flat, would that make a difference? So, and that temporary options may be less costly to install initially, but they are a maintenance headache. And then also from a public buy-in perspective, they can be ugly or eyesores, or they see that they're hard to maintain and it may not get the support that something like that may be desired.
Well, normally it's like fire trucks. The very first thing is fire trucks can't get through or buses can't move, which city engineering typically takes that into account when placing these things. So, as you were saying, public buy-in, but that's the very first thing that these folks go to when talking about that.
I've noticed different levels of nighttime luminosity of white paint. What is the level of luminosity of the lane markings here, do you know?
Honestly, I don't know, but I know like we're recently refreshed, I think, through our pavement marking contract this year. We try to do that every year. Over time they do fade, and that's why we try to have a plan in place to regularly refresh.
Is just refreshing? I don't know. I've noticed in some places the paint is really luminous. It's very highly reflective. In others, it's not. Is that just a question of the age of the paint?
It could be. So there's different materials. So there is paint that, and typically when the paint from this, I'm glad Freddy's here, he can chime in too. There's essentially glass beads that are typically also in it, and that is what gets the nighttime reflectivity. There's also like thermoplastic, which I don't know if we have much long line thermoplastic that lasts longer. So there's other materials as well that are out. And then finally, sometimes there's the essentially pavement markers that sometimes are recessed, and on more major roads, sometimes you'll see those on center lines and things like that.
So with the protected bike lane, I've noticed vehicles that are straddling that, and this particular driver, I would imagine, easily have done that, and it wouldn't have bothered them in the least. Or I've also seen vehicles in that protected lane. Will this indeed, I mean, intellectually, I want to believe that as a bicyclist, I can be protected in a lane,
right,
or on my bicycle at all.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, what else can we do with that protected lane, other than people out there to stop this woman, first from driving, and second from driving stupid?
And I want to emphasize that all these questions, like the way it's worded, and it's worded really well, is what may help or what might reduce. None of this is guaranteed, and some of it is like sometimes there are just crazy or people that make very poor decisions, or sometimes there's things that happen to people that they don't have any control of, or as I think sometimes but there are sometimes just it's what we can do to try to reduce those risks. And I don't know if I'm answering your question at all.
You are, that there is no way to guarantee anyone's protection.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen cars on the B line. It's like, what?
Yep.
People are stupid.
And I think maybe that's a good transition. So I know the last time I did a fatal crash report, I opened with this safe system approach. And so I wanted to come back to that to refresh our minds on it, but also to kind of look at this crash through that lens a little bit. And I think it might get to some of those points. So big picture, Federal Highway Administration has this safe system approach. And on the outside of the circle, it's talking about the big principles that try to frame what that safe system approach is. Those are the things that we, as Federal Highway Administration, I think we as a group agree about. They form the basis of things. And then on the things on the inside are the elements of what make up the safe system approach. So just to the principles, these are, I think, honestly, part of the reason why we're here talking about this is because we realize what happened is unacceptable. Recognize people make mistakes. Obviously, humans are vulnerable. Responsibility is shared. Somebody did something stupid, but we as a traffic commission feel like there is some responsibility to look at these things. Safety is proactive. This is one I wish we could be more proactive than we are. We're sort of reactive, but we're doing what we can. And then redundancy is crucial. So there's a number of different things, and that then transitions to the elements. So just a refresher on all the elements, all road users should be safe. Our vehicles, I talked a lot about technology and things that could have played an effect. So in this instance on Walnut Street, a road user was not safe. The vehicle technology, I don't know the details, but as far as I can tell, that did not play a factor in limited things. Speed, witnesses suggest speed was a part of it. Our data suggests that on average, people do speed. So that is something that was at fault. Safe roads is an interesting one. That's I've done presentations at engineering conferences and asked the question like, there's essentially standard-based engineering design and then there's performance-based design. From a standards-based approach, I think what is out there is okay. If anything, I might say the narrow lane is too narrow for what it should be. But from a performance base, it isn't performing the way we would like it to be. Post-crash care in this instance was not really a factor, if I'm being honest. So, but there are 4 elements that did play a part. And so as we think about like the Swiss cheese model, like if somebody does something wrong, hopefully there are other elements that are in place to try to reduce the chance of a fatal crash incident. So, there will be things that happen, but are there things that we can build in through the other elements or other tools to try to reduce those risks? So that's what I have.
Well, I mean, one of the things changed since then is just prohibition, whether that works or not, of scooters beyond, is it midnight or 11 or?
I think it's 11.
11, I think. Yeah. So that might conceivably protect someone, but then when you're dealing with college students, I would expect that to be much of a factor.
I do also think that punishes the wrong person.
Exactly, but it makes it so that when bars goes down, potentially this vulnerable being is not going to be on a vehicle that leaves them totally vulnerable.
Sure.
And at least the people on the sidewalk had somewhere to go. Probably heard the crash and saw the crash and at least knew enough to trying to get to the person who was injured. But if you're just zipping along, you may not know what's coming.
Do you know whether and how the scooter was lit? Did it have lights?
They generally do.
I know that they are required per all the, and I have to assume that it was lit, but I can't 100% definitively say that it was. I assume that it was lit.
And I'm certainly noticing an awful lot of our streets where the street lights are not functioning. The streets are so dark these days.
And that may be issue in some locations. I know when I was out there an hour ago, it was lit already today.
Okay.
So this one in this immediate spot
Okay.
is that.
Along 3rd or 2nd Street going by Rogers and Benford, all those lights are off currently.
I mean, there are just big areas of the city where the lights are not working, and I don't know whether to contact the city or whether to contact the power company. Who is responsible for our streetlights?
So what you're probably sick of me saying like you report, but ultimately for me, I think there's a member of our public works department that is our lighting experts. Most of these are Duke is responsible and we lease it from them. So we have a contact that should be reaching out to them and Duke should be addressing. The vast majority of our Duke leased, but
Okay, yeah, I figured that, and except for the ones on the B line where Parks is responsible, and the best thing to do is pick off the number on that light to let them know which light is out.
Yeah.
And they will address it rapidly.
This is not an infrastructure issue, but since Officer Cruz here, I can ask you this question. On this particular case, you noticed the data that the average speed here is 11 miles an hour over the speed limit. So the question is, what's the city's attitude, the police department's attitude about proactively enforcing the speed limits? I know that if a crash occurs and speeding occurred, then the person can get a ticket.
Right.
Or if an officer sees somebody speeding and it's a dangerous situation, probably a ticket will be issued. But that's not the same thing, putting a police car on the side street and watching for speeders.
right.
Is it fallen off the city's priority list because of lack of resources?
I don't know if it would necessarily say that it falls off of priority. It comes down to a resource. Absolutely. Though. And that makes it difficult because just the number of calls for service that we take per day is resource heavy. I mean, in and of itself. I can tell you that at least on my shift, which we're one of the busiest shifts on afternoons, that our guys do the absolute best that they can for traffic enforcement. But again, that is totally dependent upon whether or not we're jumping from call to calls. And even then, if it's a lower priority call, they may go ahead and enforce action if it's seen in front of them. But again, as for taking a proactive approach right now, it's resource heavy.
So I would just make the statement that 11 miles an hour average speed over the speed limit is very, very significant. Because we're not talking about going from 70 speed limit 55 to 66, from 25 to 36. This is a very, very significant difference, and it's a very, very heavily traveled road. I know it probably wasn't the issue in this particular case, but if we're going to have speed limits, we should be enforcing it.
I see it on West 3rd Street all the time. And I'd say people, and I have not obviously done the, but I would say people are traveling 15 to 20 miles over the speed limit on West 3rd. And it is heavily traveled, and it's heavily traveled by a lot of homeless people who randomly go out in the middle of the street, which scares the hell out of me. Don't pay attention to crosswalks, lights for the crosswalks. It's really scary to see. And yeah, thank goodness there's a large enough median that someone could potentially have an island of safety, but I don't trust that. But people, again, the very, very wide roadway makes it feel like it's an interstate, and people travel at very high speeds.
I'll note, just because I was just looking at the other 2 fatal crash reports that I've given this commission, all of them have been on streets that have measured speeds significantly above the posted speed limit, and it's really a cultural issue. There's a lot of things designed. There's a lot of things that it takes that multiple layer approach. But the hard part is sometimes we'll measure the roads and find that almost literally 0 people actually obey in certain spots the speed limit. But then if I am talking to somebody that's saying there is a speeding concern on a certain street, very rarely do I hear somebody like everybody's perfect. I never speed. Oh, but that one time I was in a hurry to get to work. But it's a cultural thing. We are selfish people that prioritize our own time.
And it's exactly why enforcement is needed, because if people can take advantage of speed limit or speeding, they will do so, or many of them will do so. That's why we need enforcement.
When can we go back?
It's like playing a professional football game without referees.
Well, I want to do citizens arrests.
Well, and I think going back to your approach with the Federal Highway Administration's, that safety concept is, I think, exactly what you're looking at here is even with the enforcement, because I can tell you that traffic enforcement is taking place from a proactive standpoint of having the ability or the resources to place an officer at a location for, we'll just say 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, something like that, is extremely difficult because I don't have that resource from where I stand. I can tell you that the enforcement is taking place, but then you have to have the follow-up and you have to have the prevention side of things in order for it to all come together.
What I mean is, if you drive through from Indiana on a freeway into Ohio, everybody slows down because they see a police officer giving a ticket here and some police officer over there giving a ticket because they know that they're.
And you're seeing
the enforcement is not only punishing the people who are violating, but it's telling everybody else that speed limits are enforced, and so you should be.
And when you're looking at that too, you're looking at, I don't know what the exact term in law enforcement is, but a secondary agency. So Ohio, we'll say Ohio and Indiana, for example, Indiana State Police are a secondary agency. They are not typically the primary 911 agency for that area that they're working out of. So Bloomington Post, for example, Bloomington will only respond to 911 calls if the agencies in that area that they're working ask for help. They run out of resources, whatever, and usually that's a last-ditch effort kind of thing. Otherwise, they are freed up for the sole purpose of traffic enforcement. So that's why you're seeing that. And not to mention, even with the state police, I can speak at least for the Indiana State Police. They're, again, so strapped for resources. That's why you see a lot of these state lines, they're going to technologically based enforcement, which is, you can see that in the toll road. I got hit with a ticket not too long ago, not speeding ticket, but just the toll road ticket going into Chicago for the weekend. And it's like you get it like 2 or 3 weeks later, and it's like, boom. It's like, how did they read my plate? But you get a picture clear as day that, yep, that's your vehicle. And that's what you're seeing, even from these state police or secondary agencies. They're so strapped for resources that they're going to technological based enforcement to try to still meet that criteria. I don't know what our department standpoint on that is. That may be more of an engineering department type of thing, but that's what you're seeing because the resource pool is so small for our profession.
So what if we had a vehicle, we could put a dummy inside the vehicle. We don't need an actual police officer, but had one of those vehicles parked by the side of the road. Would that be a deterrent to people?
I don't know the statistics on this. You may have them because I think we've talked about this in the past before. And I know that there is an immediate deterrent, but it does not last for anything significant.
That's correct. I know I had a lot of, the last city I worked with, quite a few conversations with the traffic safety unit there, and they would often get requests for that. And in some situations, they would do that more to show responsiveness, but I think there may be a short near-term thing, but that isn't going to get the cultural long-term effect.
Kind of get the scarecrow effect.
Yeah.
It works really well for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, that's when I jump out and say citizens arrest.
Well, in this day and age, you're likely to get shot. So
Can
doing
I-
a citizen's arrest.
Can I try
So-
to turn this upside down?
Oh, good.
So I look at the perspective of the presumed drunk driver. And as much as I want to, assign individual responsibility where there is individual responsibility, it looked to me from media reports, which is probably unreliable, that both of them were, both the victim and the driver were taking trips of about a mile from different points downtown to different neighborhoods north of downtown. And if I understand correctly, that the perpetrator was going to roughly 19th and Lincoln. And to me, I can't escape the fact that there are sidewalk gaps, significant sidewalk gaps between that location and 19th and Lincoln. Like there's no sidewalks on Lincoln, and there's even a sidewalk gap on Walnut. And you're being asked to consider like a protected bike lane, which is kind of a relatively radical intervention. But we can't even. If I track down that driver, I can't tell her with a straight face, you should have walked that night, which really for a trip of a mile when you're drunk, that's kind of a no-brainer to me, is that you should have walked, but there's not even sidewalks. I don't know how seriously you can take that when you know there's no budget for filling in that sidewalk.
Yeah, I mean, big picture, I would love to have sidewalk connections, especially on major roads. I think some in that area are coming to be, and largely through development as well. And then this there's other things, and that's what sorry. Essentially, there may be other never mind, I shouldn't say. So yeah.
Any other communications from